Sean O'Haire passed away this past week, as you're all aware of by now. 43 years old, former WCW and WWE superstar. He was found with a rope around his neck tied to a bedpost, so believed to have been a suicide. I think they found him on Monday morning, I believe. And according to TMZ, he had a really bad addiction to alcohol. He had been to WWE-sponsored rehab 6 times in the past 6 years, including earlier this year. I guess was his last stint there. And after that, the company tried to keep in touch with him, and he just fell off the face of the earth, and nobody knew where he was. And they lost communication with him until they found his body this past week. And, you know, he's one of those guys, Sean O'Haire, who at the very tail end of WCW, they finally tried to start pushing a lot more younger talent. And they had, you know, him and Mark Jindrak were a team, and they did the whole New Blood against the Millionaires Club angle, which was not the worst angle in the world. You can argue the execution sucked. But that's the sort of thing they should have been doing years earlier. With all that talent they had, you know, during the Monday Night Wars when that was still going on, they just did such a piss-poor job of building up new stars that a lot of those guys bolted the first chance they got. Chris Jericho, The Big Show, who, believe it or not, used to be young. We had, you know, Benoit and Malenko and Saturn and Eddie Guerrero, all of these great stars that defected over to WWE because they couldn't take it anymore, and they knew that they were never going to get above a certain level in WCW. So they lost a lot of those young stars. They only made one star, really. I mean, you could say, I guess, DDP as well, but Goldberg was the only real big-time star they made during that era, and it came back to bite them on the ass, and by the end it was too late. But he came along at a time when they were starting to push younger guys. He had a great look. You know, he's this big, jacked-up dude, seemed pretty athletic and had a good look to him. Eric Bischoff was actually a big fan of O'Haire's. He had big plans for him because Bischoff thought he had WCW bought. He had the backers, the investors. They were going to buy WCW. They had a whole big press conference announcing that they were buying WCW, except when TV got shit-canned by Jamie Kellner at Turner and there was no television anymore. The investors pulled out and Bischoff was left standing there looking like a schmuck, and he couldn't buy the company anymore because without TV, the company was worthless. But had Bischoff continued on with his plans, the idea was that WCW would go dark for at least a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months, and they would relaunch. And apparently he had big plans for O'Haire. I don't want to say O'Haire would have been the top guy, but he was going to get a big, big push as a single star under a Bischoff-led WCW, and that never came to be. That was the first instance of O'Haire being a victim of timing. Not just the Piper stuff, which came later on, which we'll get to in a second. Came over to WWE after the purchase of WCW, and they just never did anything with him. And when they finally appeared to be doing something with him, they, you know, gave him this character where I guess he was kind of a play off the Al Pacino character in Devil's Advocate, and even, you know, he was a devil character. That's what he was, and I'm not telling you something you don't already know, and he would try to get people to do a lot of really bad shit, and it was an intriguing gimmick. I thought the vignettes, which you can find on YouTube, were pretty interesting. It wasn't your average, standard pro wrestler vignette, and they paired him off with Roddy Piper, so you would think, wow, this guy's got a big push coming. He's being paired off with one of the greatest stars of all time, one of the biggest names in wrestling, and Piper was feuding with Hulk Hogan as Mr. America at that time, and I think Zach Gowen was involved. He was paired off with Hogan as well. And then Piper went and he did an interview for HBO Real Sports where he was very raw and honest in his feelings on how the wrestling business chews you up and spits you out, and a lot of the young guys, you know, his fellow comrades who have died, and it was really depressing. I mean, a lot of what Piper said was true, you know, and I'm sure he did feel that way, but it was not the sort of thing that WWE wanted to have one of their performers on HBO talking about, a lot of dead wrestlers, so they fired him. And unfortunately, when they fired Piper, that affected O'Haire because his push just stopped cold, just dead in its tracks. And I never really understood why. I don't know what one had to do with the other. You know, just because Piper wasn't around doesn't mean you couldn't continue with the vignettes and just have him doing that character on his own. He didn't need Roddy Piper. You know, it's not like he needed Piper, and without him, the character fell apart. The character could have been pushed even without Roddy Piper there. So I don't really know what happened there. I don't know if there was some political shit going on behind the scenes, or maybe he had a bad reputation, and so that was their excuse. Well, Piper's gone, so fuck this guy. We're not going to do anything with him. I just don't know. And who knows how big he could have gotten. After that, they really didn't do anything with him. He was there for a while. I think they sent him back down to developmental, and I think it was in '04 they cut him. And that was the last time he was ever employed by WWE. After that, I think he wrestled other places. He did some MMA or kickboxing, and he didn't do too well. He got into a lot of trouble. He would fight with people all the time, just get into like bar fights, and there were a lot of allegations from, I think, multiple women, ex-girlfriends, that he had, beaten them up and stuff. Although I think in most or all of those cases the charges were dropped. But again, where there's smoke, there's fire. Let's just say he did a lot of bad shit, and he fell on a lot of tough times, and he didn't do a lot of stuff that I would consider to be role model behavior. But how much of that was due to his addictions and whatever demons he may have had, who knows? He went to rehab 6 times in 6 years, so some part of him obviously wanted help. And to see his story end this way is very sad. Because, yeah, he had potential and all that, but at the same time, there's another young wrestler dead, 43 years old, another guy that's not going to see his 50th birthday, and that sucks.